This is Let's Talk Football, and you're very welcome back here on the sportshacks.com. And a man who's very welcome back is Larry Mahoney, who is, of course, big picture coaching, big picture coaching. He has just released his third book in a trilogy of coaching manuals for young coaches, for old coaches, for coaches of every level, but particularly, I think, Larry, for grassroots. You're very welcome back to Let's Talk Football, Larry.
Hiya, Carl. Great to talk to you again.
Tell us, first of all, the trilogy. The latest book is called Move Yourself. But the inspiration behind writing these books in the first instance, because I think it's a fascinating story and one which I've always said is so necessary because 9 times out of 10, the coaches involved in grassroots football at underage level start off as parents.
Yeah, well, basically that's what it is. It's an attempt to give coaches of every standard a resource that they can use. And it's exactly the scenario you spoke about. I've come across so many parents who are thrown a bag of balls and are thrown in the middle of coaching the team and don't really have any help whatsoever. So the books are very, very simply an aid to coaches. And ultimately, they're an aid to players because we always say, I do a little bit of work with the DDSL, and Barry Ferguson, who's the director there, at the start of every session, he says to coaches, well, if every coach that we affects 10 kids, well, then you have to be doing good for the game in the country, you know? So I would always start from that viewpoint that there's something like between the last two books, there's around 1,500 books sold. So you're talking about 15,000 kids affected, hopefully, and hopefully in a positive way.
And of course, and I've come through this myself with Dunshaughlin Youths as a chairperson and as a coach and as a manager and all sorts, and washed kits, marked pitches, put up goals, all those things that everybody does,
Yeah.
Larry, when they're involved in grassroots football. But for some of those parents coming into coaching at under six and under seven and under eights, they may not have a football background at all, or some of them will be fellas who might have been ex-League of Ireland or girls who might have been ex-Women's League of Ireland, etc. So it literally is the whole spectrum, isn't it?
Well, the thing about those people coming in, even people with huge experience in the game, even the best players, there's a big difference between being a good player and being able to coach. Right. So coaching is a completely different ball game, and a lot of ex-professional players come into coaching, and they find that right, they know the game, but what they don't have is they don't have the knack of being able to put the whole thing across in a simple, logical way. Because I always say, again, when I'm working with coaches, I try and make the point that the job of the youth coach, of the coach for children, is to simplify the game rather than complicate it. But unfortunately, a lot of adults, what they're trying to do all the time, they're trying to rush kids towards the adult game. So basically, the books are written in a way that the coach can start on page one. He or she can do what's on page one and work their way all the way up to page 160. Very, very simple, logical steps. Right. So what I've done more or less is, in terms of the subjects that we're working on, the first two books are about probably a little older kids, probably kids once they get out of the individual stuff and they start passing and they start combining as teammates. So, you know, what it is over the years and over the, unfortunately, 50 years that I've been coaching, like I sort of know what to expect. I know what's coming next. I know the mistakes that the players are going to make. So that's the way the book is designed, to guide the coaches and more or less saying, well, this is what you'll see first, and this is how you'll remedy it. This is what you'll see next, and this is how you remedy it, and so on and so on and so on. That is the way that the books are designed.
And what comes across, Larry, as well, is the fact that, as you say, you have 50 years experience as a coach. And
Unfortunately.
at this stage, I mean,
Yeah.
you've probably heard every question and you've come across every answer. And that's very much portrayed in these books, isn't it?
Right, exactly. And so one of the things on coaching courses that you'll hear all the time, and this has been a very, very modern way, because even at the top level now, even the best coaches in the world, can't just pour out information and pour out instructions. You have to engage whoever you're speaking to. Now, we're talking about top coaches, but even on a very, very basic level. So what we're told on coaching courses, and what all coaches are told on coaching courses, is rather than just pour out information, is to use questioning, right? Now, using questioning, right, it's a great idea, right? It's very, very difficult for a beginner coach to have the confidence to do that and to have the know-how to do that. So that's actually the way the books are written. The books are a series of questions that the coaches will ask the players. So, simple example, right at the very, very start, right? Rather than shouting at the sort of more or less the first session, rather than shouting at players to spread out, it's what adults do, right? Right. A simple question, very, very simple question on a very, very basic level is, can you find yourself some more space? Can you see where you can go to give yourself more space and to give your teammate more space? And it continues on in that way. So every single coaching point that I make in the book, right, or any of the books, right, is accompanied by a relevant question to ask to the players. So it's what I'm trying to do. And again, a lot of lip service is paid to the whole idea of making players, or not making players, but helping players and developing players that can think for themselves. And again, very, very nice in theory, very, very difficult to do. But the nuts and bolts of doing that, of enabling players to make decisions, to be good decision makers, is to use questioning techniques. So that's the thinking behind it. Because it's very, very easy for an adult, and I see this all the time, and I see teams and I see kids, that when an adult shouts, spread out or play it early or whatever, the kids will do it, right? But the thing about it is they're doing it because the adult was telling them. But the next time they get the ball, without that adult's help, they'll just go back to doing what they were doing previously. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop players who can actually see these situations for themselves, can see the possible solutions, and then can make the right decisions for the team.
How important is that to start at a very young age? I mean, in terms of, we see academies and I mean nursery academies here rather than League of Ireland academies, for example, but we see them nowadays from sort of 4 or 5 years of age popping up in communities across the country. So how important is it to get that message across early, and then it becomes a uniform message throughout their football life?
Right. Okay. Now, the thing about it is, right, the youngest kids, Carl, you won't be doing that with the youngest kids, right? The youngest, again, this whole idea of adults, right? As soon as they get the manager's coat on, like they change personality. The big long coat turns them into some type of dictator, right? So adults are constantly shouting information at kids, whereas the very, very youngest kids, it's not that relevant to them, because all the youngest kids see is themselves on the ball. So anyone who's ever seen an under-6 game can totally relate to that, because all the kids do is run after the ball. And of course, all the adults are shouting, spread out, spread out, spread out. And if the kids, like I said, the kids might do that for the first time, but then they'll all bunch in together
They
again.
just see the ball, don't they? And they want
themselves the ball. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they'll see the proper goal. Sometimes, if you're not lucky, they'll be going the wrong way, and all the managers will be shouting, "Go the other way, Johnny!" Well, this idea of players reading the game for themselves will only start to be applied when the players mature enough, are psychologically ready to look away from themselves, right? So again, when the logic is very, very simple, right? The logic is simple. If young players are only going to think of themselves as individuals, well, they must be coached as individuals. Now, that's the most obvious thing in the world. But you look at coaches who are working with kids, they have them standing in lines, and it's the classic, what I call the boarding method, where the coach is standing at the head of a line of 10 kids, pass it to me, pass it back, control it, pass it back to me, which is not relative to what those kids are seeing. So those younger kids are only seeing themselves in the ball. So those kids, there won't be a huge emphasis with them on making decisions for themselves. All you really, and don't really want to speak in negative terms here, but the youngest kids, what you're saying to them is, don't boot the ball away from yourself. get on the ball and show me some skill, right? So this idea of decision makers, it comes a little bit later. Now, usually that's around the under 10 season. So really what the books are sort of starting to work from there. Now, one of the things that I'd often speak about with coaches is that under 10 season, that is just a guideline, a very, very simple guideline, because a really, really talented under 9 team would be capable of understanding stuff that maybe what you might call your common or garden under 11 team wouldn't be ready for.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be ready for that. So rather than these development models that you see where there's age groups, right, and at this age they should be doing this, I always urge coaches just look at what's in front of your face. If the players have the control and the ability to get on the ball and look away from themselves, that's when you teach them to make decisions. But up until then, it's all individual stuff. So the books really take it from, like I said, commonly the under 10 season on.
In terms of young talent, how excited are you now, and how excited have you been over the 50 years in terms of the talent that you're seeing in front of you?
Carl, I've always had this, I say this all the time, right? I used to work in primary schools. I go into primary schools and do sessions. And in every single primary school, without exception, there's a brilliant footballer. Right? In a lot of schools, there's a brilliant footballer in every class. Right? There could be 5 or 6 footballers in each school who have absolutely fantastic physical ability. Now, there's 2 elements that comes in. So that's raw talent. But there's 2 elements that come into play. Right? Number one is their own individual makeup, their psychological makeup. So the kids that make it, the really, really good players, they not only have the physical gifts, they have the psychological gifts as well. But then the other thing is the environment that they're put into in terms of how well they're coached, how they're developed, how they're helped. And in all honesty, you have to be honest and say the amount they get the lucky breaks. Some players, as well as I know, who we've seen over the years have absolutely fantastic skill and then just happen to be in the wrong place in the wrong time and never made it. So honestly, without being glib about it, I'm as excited now about the talent that we have as I ever was. There's always talent bubbling under, right? It's about getting that talent through, and of course that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? How do you do that?
But it's also a collective thing, Larry, isn't it? I mean, it's not just down to the individual or his or her parents. I mean, it's a collective.
No.
As a game, as a sport, there is a collective responsibility here.
This is what I'm saying about the whole environment. Everything, right? Everything comes into play. Every single thing. We always used to use the same when we were working on the coaching courses in terms of motivation, and we used to say motivation is not one thing. Motivation is everything, right? So I sort of turn that around and say every single thing. What's going on away from the football will have an impact on the players. How they're doing in school, how their parents are supporting them, and how their parents are, like I said, the mental side of the game that they're getting. But all of these elements have to come into play. But the raw talent has always been there, and I think is now just as plentiful as it's ever been.
You mentioned parents. I mean, how important are the expectations of parents with young players? Because I think we've all seen parents who, and the phrase I think is they live their youth through their children.
Yeah. We used to back in the old school stuff, we had a terrible attitude, right? We used to say, ignore the parents, have nothing to do with them. Stay away from them, have nothing to do with them, don't do anything to them. But we know better than that now, because this biggest single influence on a young player in terms of that mental makeup that we spoke about, right, is their parents. So the parents have to be recruited into the whole process, right? Very, very simple things, right? I had to laugh just lately. I couldn't believe what I saw. I saw an under 14 player getting ready for the game, and his mom lacing up his boots for him before the game, right? So now, you know what I'm going to say next. That is not what we need from parents. What we need from parents need to understand this, right? We need the parents to be given the kids the right mental makeup, right? The discipline to get their own gear ready, to get themselves up in the morning, right? To make their own breakfast before they go to a game, right? To get them to make sure that they're on time training. These are all how parents impact the really what players are going to end up as or not end up as. Now, that's on one side of it. Now, unfortunately, and this is not just someone of my generation problem. I think this is readily accepted now. Coming back to your exact question, the expectations of parents now, it's just gone beyond belief. Like the way parents behave now compared to the way they did even 10, maybe 15 years ago. Like, it's just gone mad. Like, the parents expect everything to be done for their kids. But what you see now, I know parents have always been this, but I cannot believe sometimes how blind parents are. Like working in academies, you always come across parents who think, their kid is the best player in the academy. And there was always that parent, but now it seems that there's so many of them now. Like the expectations of just the lack of realism now is just unbelievable.
I remember one parent telling me that her child was the next Ronaldo, and I had to bite my lip, Larry, because I hadn't seen a Ronaldo in Ireland. Never mind in my local parish. So I mean, it is something I think that the parents need to be aware of. Coaches as well, and in terms of educating coaches, and these 3 books are going to be a great educational tool for them. But I remember being at a dinner one night, and Alex Ferguson said he was as much a psychologist as he was a manager, particularly with young kids playing football for the first time and starting off in the game. The manager, the coach, the parents, they're part psychologist, part educator, part coach, part friend. There's just so much responsibility, isn't there, at working with those age groups?
Yeah, but here's the thing, though, Carl. Like, everything you say there is right, but they're still only kids. They still, number one, the number one reason they come to play football is to play football and enjoy playing football. So anything that you can do, right, to make sure that happens, you're doing a good job as a coach, right? Now, unfortunately, like I said earlier about coaches complicating the game, but I would have thought at this stage that sort of anyone involved in coaching knows the benefit of positive communication, right? But unfortunately, I've seen over the last couple of years, like I've seen still an awful lot of criticism and abuse, and giving out the players, continuously giving out the players and pointing out their faults. Whereas what we need to be doing, the best thing that a coach can do is to build the confidence of the players, to make them feel that they're worthy and that they can play and that they're confident in that they're able to do what they're being asked to do. So again, everything comes into play here. So the way you plan your training, the way you look after, in other words, the way you behave during the coaching sessions, all of those things are in relation to that goal. So everything must be done with that in mind. Number one, to make sure the players enjoy it, and number two, the players grow in confidence. So how do players grow in confidence? They grow by being given realistic challenges and then meeting those challenges. Whereas, like I said, there's an awful lot of stuff, and I see an awful lot of coaches complicating stuff and giving players stuff to do where the kids are never going to achieve what the goals that have been set for them.
Finally, in terms of young players, I'm going to ask you in a minute about some of the players you've worked with, and you can tell us some of the names because they are quite incredible, and the careers that they've had. But it's not just about careers, Larry, is it? It's about it's about kids learning to love the game and carrying that love with them the rest of their lives. Because too many kids will love football up to 17 and 18, and particularly in the girls' game, there's a huge drop off. Then they drop out of sport altogether. It mightn't just be soccer; it might be whatever sport they're also involved in. But to foster that love for football amongst kids is such an important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you see, the first thing when I'm working with coaches and I'm saying to them, and I'm working on the sessions. We last year with the DDSL, we did a series of sessions, but we did the same session. We went to different clubs and did it, and it was the very very basics. It was for the smallest kids, the first thing that they would do, right at the very very bottom, and the message that we were giving the coaches was from the kids' point of view, they have to enjoy it, right? And from the club's point of view, they must come back. They must come back. So you've got coaches must strive to make the sessions enjoyable. Okay. Now that means different things to different in different environments. So say for example, if players are say for example in an under 14 National League squad, right? The type of session they'd be doing would be different, right? They'd be working towards more specific goals, but they still have got to enjoy the work that they're doing. They still have got to enjoy it. So the session has got to be set up so the players, number one, have positive experiences, and number two, are working towards set goals. Now, at the other end of the scale, the young kids that are only starting off, the main thing there, right, is that they enjoy it, that they have fun. So it's all on a continuum, right? But at from every single club's point of view, it's really, really important that we provide an environment for the kids, an enjoyable environment that they want to come back. That is the key for every single club in the country.
I will ask you in a second where people can get access to the 3 books, not just the latest one, which is called Move Yourself. But also, I'm going to ask you before that to drop some names, Larry. I mean, give us an idea of some of the talent that you've worked with over the years, male and
well, yeah. Well, you see, I was lucky because I worked on the falls courses, right? And one of the perks of working on the falls courses back then, John McGrath and Murray Price were sort of involved in all the international teams, so they would come to us. All the international training sessions would be on. They used to come to us where the courses were based in Stuart's Hospital or King's Hospital. So I sort of saw them all, of that generation. When I was working for the FAI, I would have seen them all. But the big name drop is always Roy Keane. Like I can't get away from that. You have to drop that one. So Roy was on the. I was the assistant instructor on the falls course that Roy went away from. So we had him. So I was very, very close to him.
And he literally was on that course when he signed for Forest, wasn't he?
He went from us.
Yeah, he
went from us to Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, he started that famous.
That's the big name. So
yeah.
There were lots of League of Ireland players' names, League of Ireland names that I would have worked with over the years. My time in the League of Ireland as well, like just a random name. Like when I was with Rovers, like Noel Hunt would have been there. So Noel went on and did really, really well. The latest, the one I'm asked about mostly now is Liam Scales. Yeah. I live in Arklow, and Liam is from Arklow, and I had Liam from under 9 to under 13 in Arklow town. So I saw him very, very closely, And
he wasn't a centre back in those days.
No, this is the big story. Like people just don't believe it, That Liam was a winger. He was an outside left, right? And I'm always asked about this, and this is the story that I always tell. But Liam wasn't just looking at him now and how tall he is and how gangly he sort of is. If I told you he was a winger, most people would get this image in their head of him getting the ball and pushing by. You and I would remember Tony Galvin, right? That type of winger. But he wasn't. He was tricky. He had really, really, really good feet, And like I've told this story 100 times now. People always ask, what was Liam like and all that. So I moved away from Arklow town. I was working with the DLR Waves in the National League. when the National League started, I moved to them. So again, this story has been told 100 times now at this time. But his dad rang me one time and said, Liam is playing, he's playing for the school's international team. Will you come down and have a look? And I said, of course I'll come down and have a look, like, you know. So I went down, and I swear to God, Carl, I was absolutely flabbergasted to see him playing centre-back. I could not believe that he was playing centre-back. Now, if you had to ask me, could Liam play centre-back? I would have always said, of course he could play centre-back. But he's too good to play centre-back. Right? If you had to ask me, could Liam play centre midfield? I would have said, yeah, Liam could play centre midfield, because not only even as a young kid, not only had he got good feet, but he had a very, very good football brain as well. I always remember one incident, and again, I've been asked this question 100 times. I can remember one incident when he was playing under 12, and like I said, he was playing outside left. But I always remember, and I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because it just gives you an example of his football brain. I can remember him switching it all the way over in an under 12 game from the outside left position to the outside right. And we did have outside lefts and outside rights back in those days. And thinking to myself, not many kids would have seen that. Not many kids would have seen that pass. So he always had a football brain, and his dad will back me up on this one. Around the under 12 season, his dad came to me and says, do you think he has a chance? And I said, yeah, I do think he has a chance, you know. But, and again, in terms of the name dropping sessions, again, coming back to what I said earlier, right? Physical attributes and physical ability, really, really important. But I always sort of connect the two lads up. I always connect Roy and Liam up in one specific way. Now, I know there's a huge difference between the two of them and how they play, you know. But I always connect them up in one specific way, right? And again, people have heard me say this, tell this, speak this way 100 times. When people always ask me about Roy Keane, I always say, well, Roy had undoubted ability. And I always get into trouble for saying he probably wasn't the best player on the fast course, you know. I always get into trouble for saying that. But what, in my reading of the situation with Roy Keane, was Roy had the mental quality where nothing fazed him. He was always able to step up. So as you said, he went from Rockmount and he went straight into Cove's team, and he just played, right? So he was with us, and then he was with Cove. He went straight from Cove to Nottingham Forest, and he just played.
Straight
he just made that
straight
step
into the
up.
match at Anfield.
It didn't faze him. Yeah. It just didn't faze him. You know, and of course Clough had a role to play in that, because he didn't tell him that he was going to play. He just threw him straight in. So, and then when he went from Forest to Manchester United, it was the same thing.
Straight in.
He just played. He never had a settling in period. There was never a period where he was looking after himself and watching himself. He just played, you know. But that ability to step up, now I know not to the same degree and not in the same amount, but I see Liam
in that
category. That he was able just to step up. He has that ability to step up. And like we said earlier, we all know players who had unbelievable physical gifts, but weren't able to make that step up.
And for various reasons and various circumstances, never got to make that. I'm going to ask you, as I said in a second, about where to get the book, but the introduction is by Wes Hoolahan. And I think if any player tells the story of, again, like Roy Keane, if you believe and if you want it and if you have faith in your own ability, you will make it. And Wes Hoolahan personifies that, doesn't he?
Yeah. Now, Wes has been very kind to write the foreword for the book. Wes, I wouldn't claim that I work very closely with him, you know, but again, it was the scenario that I spoke about where I was around all the squads and I would have come across him there and I would have coached him there. And there was a clip years ago, we did the soccer show on the TV, and there's a clip going around somewhere of me coaching him, you know, which is great, like, you know, it's great to have. But
is it black and white?
Yeah. But there was a very specific reason why I went after Wes, and I asked him, and I have to thank Thomas Morgan for helping me to get in touch with him and that, you know. Thomas is his cousin. It's this book. The first two books, like I said, were about players combining and starting to pass, right, and being able to build moves and being able to make passes and build possession and get into the other team's half. Right now, the logic behind this book is when players get good at that, and when they reach a certain phase and they reach a certain age, when the defender gets a little bit better, they need a little bit extra, right? So this book is about. It's funny. It's like going back to the street. It's all the streetwise stuff. It's all the clever little stuff. It's all about the little 1-2s and the overlaps and little crossovers, the clever type of stuff. Now, if ever there was a player who exemplified the clever stuff, it's Wesley, you know? Like a player like him, who at the time when he was playing, and unfortunately didn't play enough for the national team, just in terms of that ability, just stuck out like a sore thumb. Like he was actually playing a different game to all of his teammates at that time, you know? And I think that's one of the really, really fortunate episodes with the Irish international team, that, you know, he was always a fringe player and he was never deemed the type of player who should have
first on the list.
Yeah, first build a team around this player.
Yeah,
because this player can find a pass. Like at times when we just had none of that creativity, he was able to provide that creativity. But anyway, we could talk about the history of the Irish international team for a long time. But that's what this book is about. Once the players are able to build possession and they're getting a little bit better, but the opposition are getting a little bit better as well. They need a little bit. And I know it's a sort of a strange title, the title Move Yourself, but the title goes back to the sort of development, a simplified development model that I sort of worked on. I came up with myself, a simplified version of all these development models you see. Because the last phase, the phase that the previous books were about, I call it the move the ball phase, where they learn to move the ball. So following on from that, the next phase is move yourself. So someone who hasn't read the other books, I'm thinking to myself, well, they wouldn't have a clue what this is about. What the hell? A football book called Move Yourself. But that's the connection there. The previous phase was move the ball. This phase is move yourself. In other words, we're looking for more movement and more clever movement. And that's what this book is about.
And that's the trilogy. That's the third part of the trilogy, as you say.
The trilogy.
So Larry,
John Grisham. The grand John Grisham of Irish football.
the John Grisham Guide to Coaching. So tell us, Larry, finally, where can people get hold of the book and how can they get in touch with you?
I always feel a little bit embarrassed when I say that I have a website, but I'd rather say I have a web page, right? And the address is bigpicturecoachingireland.com.
We will stick the link on the bottom of the screen. So bigpicturecoachingireland.com. Larry Mahoney, as always, it's been a pleasure. The very best of luck with Move Yourself, the third in 3 books, coaching manuals for coaches and for everybody starting out on that coaching journey. And for those who are already well ensconced in the coaching journey, it's a fascinating insight. As you said, Larry, it asks the questions, it provides the answers, and we can ask no more than that of you. So thank you for your time and the very best of luck.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks very much.